it's interesting because there's noise of this new deal coming up. What could it potentially look like? And then on one extreme, you have things like universal basic income, right? That's sort of that utopian model. And I've actually discussed this with you know CEOs and entrepreneurs. What could that model look like? It's a very fascinating one, but I'll put a pin on it right now as well. One thing that's trending, and you mentioned, World War II that came out of that, the Great Depression, is tensions between China and the US. Well, tensions between China and the rest of the world, quite frankly, right now. Um, and on one end, traditionally US has been this bastion of freedom. It seems freedom is under attack in the US itself right now. How do you see this playing out with vis-a-vis China and the US?
I don't know. In the midst of the pandemic, all bets are off, right? Because um, China is under siege. The greatest growth after the United States sustained growth in from the late 40s through to about 1970. The greatest period of sustained growth in the history of the world has been China since about, let's say, 1975 till now, and and that is obviously has ground to a halt. And the society was quiescent thanks to these ultra police state, and thanks to the growing economy that created a middle class in China for the first time in its whatever 6,000 year history. It was quiescent. There wasn't there weren't many Tiananmen squares. People fell into line, and uh, and the society has worked. But it's a fascist state. I know we call it communist China. Ain't nothing communist about it. It is a modern fascist state, and which with all the repression that implies, and and all of the government control of of uh, of capital and sources of production that implies. And sorry, and it's anybody's question is, now that their economy has ground to a halt, now that they have widespread death, now that for the second time in 10 years the society has proved to lie even about pandemic, as because they lied about COVID much as they lied about SARS a decade ago, which is another form of coronavirus that caused a worldwide pandemic. um, they um, they they have lost political capital among their own population. And
So
by the
here's
way, they've
the
become more and more
go ahead.
aggressive militarily with respect to the rest of the world,
Right.
especially in the South China Sea. They've reneged on their agreements in Hong Kong to let it be autonomous, and more and more and more, the heavy hand of Beijing is influencing political activity in Hong Kong, which was supposed to be left alone. And they they're having a tough time, and maybe it will affect the balance of power. Oh, plus our clown is operating a trade war against them uh, at not a propitious time for us or them. So who knows when we have to pick up the pieces where the power will reside. Um, it's hard to bet against whatever they have, 4 billion people and a gigantic military and the world's second biggest economy. It's hard to bet against that, but who the hell knows?
The funny thing is, on one end, we're seeing Trump as a clown that he could be, potentially bought out in different ways. On the other end, it seems that he is taking more of a stronger stance against China. And I'm sure there are ulterior motives to that, and we can jump into that. But for example, one thing he is definitely, talking about front and center is closing the borders. And when he decided to do it earlier, on the Democratic side, everybody was calling him, "Hey, you're being a racist. You're being this." So how do we reconcile those two things? If China is a modern fascist state, then it seems like Trump is taking them on, but not so much the Democrats. So how do we kind of reconcile this?
Well, it's hard. First, I'll talk about Trump. What he does with respect to China changes based on the political expediency of the moment. And, they are a very large trading partner. But when he criticizes them, he talks in economically nonsensical ways. He talks about the balance of trade, and he thinks that they're like robbing us of money that we deserve to have because they're selling us more stuff than we're selling to them, right? And he thinks that's the end of the story. But it isn't the end of the story. It's not even the beginning of the story. He forgets, for example, that when they sell us stuff, it gives American consumers, and there's 350 million of them, cheap goods, which improve their lifestyle and means money that they're not spending on other stuff. So it improves America's standard of living, even though our manufacturing sector has been gutted by globalism, especially with respect to China. It has had tremendous benefits for the consumer society. So this notion of them robbing us is it's literally nonsensical, and I think he literally doesn't understand. Um, Other times, when he decides he has to look like a peacemaker and a deal maker, he goes to China, and all of a sudden, China can do no wrong, and the president, oh my gosh, is it Lee? Is his best
Uh,
friend, and
yeah.
they're asshole buddies, and this, that, and the other thing. And then now he needs a scapegoat for the Wuhan virus because for COVID-19, he wants to call the China virus, China, 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 because it apparently originated there. And he wants to talk about how he saved America by shutting down the borders. Again, first, when he shut down the borders, he was appealing to his nativist base because he was keeping, you know, people of color out, which always plays well to that crowd. He didn't really shut down the borders. There were lots and lots of traffic going back and forth. And by the way, for the entire month of February, when he was boasting about how he saved the country from the yellow peril, which is the racist term they used to apply to China, while he was doing that, he entirely neglected the fundamental public health measures that we needed in this society, including ventilators, PPEs, uh, 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 work on a vaccine, work on a treatment. Oh, he's telling people to use hydroxychloroquine and drink bleach, and but
Inject bleach,
he's encouraging
even better.
states to open up to for further spread of the virus. And I mean, it what he was doing and what he was not doing were both catastrophic. So I wouldn't call him the guy who has finally called China into account. No, no, no. Since Nixon, the American administrations, Democratic and Republican, with the eye of the gigantic market that China represents, because we sell a lot of stuff to them, has kind of zipped its lips about political repression. And just as we have zipped our lips about an ungodly amount of political and religious suppression, repression, and oppression in Saudi Arabia because they have oil. That is one of the worst regimes on God's green earth. And we've been doing business with them since the war because they got something that we need, or at least we thought we needed. Uh, no, Donald Trump is not the guy who has finally stood up to Beijing.
Right. It seems like this has been happening, whether Democrat or Republican, it doesn't matter. Uh, U.S. support for regimes has been happening for more than half a century now.
Um,
So it doesn't matter if it's Trump or if it's, I don't know, Obama, like it doesn't really matter. This is going to continue.